My girlfriend copied my house key and gave it to her mother. Then she tried to move her entire family into my $387,000 home at Easter dinner. In her texts, I wasn't a boyfriend, I was an asset. So I brought cornbread and a lawyer on speed dial. My name is Mason. I'm 38 years old. I fix diesel engines for a living, heavy equipment, fleet trucks, the kind of work that gets your hands dirty and keeps them that way. I'm not going to pretend I'm a complicated guy. I own one good jacket. I eat the same breakfast every weekday. I like things simple and I like things quiet. The house was mine, not mine in the loose sense people use when they mean they're renting or still making payments, mine as in fully paid off. No lien, no mortgage, nobody's name on the deed but my own. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a detached garage I'd converted into a studio apartment. I bought it at 31 after 7 years of working weekends on top of my regular job. Side repairs, odd jobs, whatever came through. No inheritance. No help. Just hours logged on top of more hours. I paid it off at 34 and I hadn't written a mortgage check since. The garage apartment rented short-term, mostly traveling workers and medical staff who needed something clean and temporary. $850 a month, steady. I wasn't rich. I was just done paying for something that was already mine. I'd lived alone in that house for 6 years before Kendra came into the picture. I met her at a friend's cookout in the spring. She was sharp, easy to talk to, had a way of making a conversation feel effortless. 2 kids from a previous marriage, Lily, 7, and Cole, 9. I knew that going in and it wasn't an issue. We started dating. Things seemed to move at a reasonable pace, or so I thought. Looking back, the pattern was always there. At the time, I just called it her personality. She had a way of floating ideas as daydreams, never demands, never direct asks. Just soft little questions dropped into the air. Wouldn't it be nice if we cooked dinner here more often? Wouldn't it be nice if the kids had their own room when they stayed over? Small things, easy to say yes to without fully hearing what you were agreeing to. The kids had stayed over 3 weekends in 8 months. After each visit, something of theirs stayed behind. A backpack, a phone charger, a small dresser that appeared in the second bedroom one Tuesday while I was at work. I noticed. I didn't say anything. That was my first mistake. By month 7, Kendra was at my place 4 nights a week. She had a key one I'd given her. What I didn't know yet was that she hadn't just used it. She'd copied it. I found that out later, along with a few other things. It was a Tuesday. I came off a 10-hour shift, pulled into my driveway, and my key didn't work. I stood there for a moment thinking I'd grabbed the wrong ring. I hadn't. I tried again. Nothing. The lock was new, different hardware, different keyhole, brushed nickel instead of the brass I'd installed myself 7 years ago. Someone had swapped it out while I was at work. I knocked. Kendra opened the door from the inside, already talking before I could say a word. "The old one was sticking," she said. "I took care of it." "You're welcome." She said it like she'd done me a favor. Like replacing a lock on a house she didn't own was just something helpful people do. I asked her where my key was. She said she'd had 2 copies made and would get me one shortly. She pressed a shiny new key into my hand, smiled, and walked back to the kitchen. That was the entire conversation. No mention of asking permission. No acknowledgement that this was my house, my door, my lock. She just handled it the way you handle something that belongs to you. I didn't argue. I should have. Instead, I looked around the kitchen and noticed the locksmith receipt sitting on the counter left there without a second thought. I picked it up. My address. The date. 12 days before Easter. 2 copies made. I was holding one of them. That meant someone else had the other. I took a photo of the receipt, folded it back exactly the way I found it, and set it down without saying anything. 3 days later, Kendra mentioned, completely casually, that her mother Denise had stopped by while I was at work to take a look around. Let herself in. Walked through my home, left. Kendra said it like it was nothing. She just wanted to see the layout. Wouldn't it be nice if she felt comfortable here too? She changed the lock on a house she didn't own and handed the second key to her mother. I stopped calling it a quirk. The following weekend, I went down to the basement to grab a socket set. I got halfway down the stairs and stopped. 8 large storage boxes were stacked against the far wall. Not my boxes. I'd never seen them before in my life. Each one had a name written on the side in black permanent marker, Kendra's handwriting, neat and deliberate. I walked over and read the labels. Kids' room, kitchen, living room. I crouched down and opened the one marked kitchen. Dishes. A full set, wrapped in newspaper. I opened kids' room. Children's clothes folded in stacks. Shoes lined up on top. A small desk lamp. These were not overnight items. These were not things you toss in a bag for a weekend. These were moving boxes, organized by room, staged and labeled like a floor plan sitting in my basement, like someone had already drawn up the arrangement. Then I got to the last box in the row. It wasn't labeled with a room. It was labeled with a name. Denise. Kendra's mother had a box in my basement. A woman who had never lived here, never paid a dime toward this house, never been asked to stay. She already had her belongings packed and waiting in my home. I stood there for a moment. Then I pulled out my phone and photographed every single box. 8 boxes, 8 labels, every angle. Kendra had brought them in on a Tuesday while I was on shift. She had a key. She'd used it. I set my phone down and went back upstairs without saying a word. That evening I sat at the kitchen table and pulled up my bank statements. I wasn't looking for anything specific at first, but once I started scrolling, I couldn't stop. 8 months of transactions laid out in black and white, and a pattern I'd been too comfortable to name. $30 for gas when Kendra's card wasn't working. $112 for groceries, just this once. $240 for her dog's vet bill. $68 for a school supply run for the kids. A dinner she'd forgotten her wallet for. A car repair she swore she'd pay back. She never did. None of them came back. I added it up twice because I didn't believe the first number. 31 transactions. 8 months. $2,740 not in one ask. Not in anything big enough to flag. Just 31 small ones, each soft enough that saying no would have felt petty in the moment. I printed the statement and circled every single transaction in pen. Then I set it on my workbench next to the box photos and looked at both of them under the shop light. I'd been calling it dating. Denise called it family shares. 31 transactions later, I was starting to think those two phrases meant the exact same thing. 3 days later, I picked up Kendra's phone off the kitchen counter and learned that none of this had been accidental. Kendra left her phone face up on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. I wasn't snooping. I walked past, and a notification lit the screen. A text from Denise. I could read the preview without touching anything. 4 words. Once the kids are in. I stopped. I picked up the phone. It wasn't locked. The thread opened, and I started reading, and I didn't put it down until I'd gone back 6 weeks. What I found wasn't a conversation between a daughter and her mother. It was a project plan. 6 weeks of back and forth, laid out in neat little messages, about me and my house, and exactly how to move from point A to point B without asking me a single direct question. Kendra had noted the bedroom count. She'd flagged the garage apartment as where Mom could stay. She'd outlined a timeline: get the kids sleeping there regularly, move boxes in gradually, make the full announcement at Easter in front of the whole family so I'd feel socially cornered. Her exact words: if everyone's already clapping, he won't make a scene. There was one message I kept coming back to. Kendra describing me to her mother, not as someone she loved, not even as someone she particularly liked. She called me practical. She called me stable. She noted that the house was paid off and the garage brought in steady income. She had written all of that down in a text like she was filling out a form. She didn't fall for me. She assessed me. I took screenshots of the entire thread. 6 weeks, every message, every timestamp. I put the phone back face up, same angle, same spot. Then, I went out to the garage and sat in my truck for a while, not out of anger, just to think somewhere quiet. The phrase that kept running through my head was simple. Inventory, not interest. I was never the boyfriend. I was the building. And Easter was the closing date. I had a decision to make. I made it before I walked back inside. 2 days before Easter, Denise called me directly. Her voice was warm, friendly, even. She said she was just so excited about the new arrangement. She talked about the yard. She talked about how good it would be for the children. Then she said, families should share what they have, don't you think? Not a question. A statement wearing a question's clothes. I told her I hadn't agreed to any arrangement. She paused exactly 1 second. Then, oh, Kendra mentioned you were already on board. Wouldn't it be nice to have a full house for the holidays? Like my answer didn't quite count. Like I'd misunderstood my own position. I stayed quiet. People like Denise always fill silence themselves. She talked for another 4 minutes. I was recording the whole call. When she hung up, I had 14 minutes of audio, a full text thread screenshotted, and a clearer picture than I'd ever had of what Sunday was going to be. I opened my contacts and scrolled to a name I hadn't dialed in 2 years. Mr. Bell. My attorney. I called him that night, and I told him to clear his Easter Sunday. I called Mr. Bell at 8:30 that night and talked for 20 minutes. I laid it out the way I describe a broken engine, what happened, in what order, what I had documentation for. The changed lock. The copy given to Denise. The boxes in the basement labeled by room, one of them with her mother's name on it. The $2,740 across 31 transactions. The text thread going back 6 weeks. The recorded call from 2 days prior. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You own the property outright? Your name only on the deed?" I said yes. He said, "No tenancy agreement, no cohabitation contract, nothing in writing giving her or any member of her family legal standing in the home?" I said correct. He said, "Then she has no claim. None of them do." He said it plainly, like he was reading from a manual. The lock change was unauthorized and legally actionable. The boxes constituted trespassing. The key handed to Denise compounded it. He told me to prepare 3 documents before Easter Sunday. First, a formal written notice to Kendra stating clearly that no tenancy agreement existed and none would be entered into. Second, a written demand for the removal of all unauthorized property within 72 hours. Third, a cease and desist on the lock demanding my original hardware be reinstated or I'd pursue replacement costs and a trespassing complaint. I printed all 3 at the FedEx near my shop the following morning. Standing at that machine watching the pages come through, I felt something settle. Not anger, just clarity. Before I'd hung up with Bell the night before, I'd asked him one more thing. I asked if he'd be available by phone on Easter Sunday in case I needed someone to speak on the record in front of witnesses. There was a pause. He said, "You're going to the dinner?" I said I was. He said, "Bring your phone fully charged. I'll be available." That was Thursday. Friday morning, I made a second call. I contacted the travel nursing agency I'd used before for the garage apartment. I told them I had a unit available, 1-year lease, furnished, move-in ready in 3 weeks. By Friday afternoon, they had a match. A travel nurse named Reyes, placed at a hospital 40 minutes away, needed housing the following month. We spoke briefly. Straightforward, good references, no complications. I sent the lease electronically. She signed within 48 hours. The timing matters, so I want to be exact about it. Reyes signed that lease on a Thursday. Kendra made her Easter announcement on a Sunday. The garage apartment, the unit Kendra had flagged in her texts to Denise as where Mom could stay, the one built into their 6-week floor plan, was legally occupied with a signed tenant before Easter Sunday ever happened. That room was gone before Kendra finished that sentence at the dinner table. I also called Dana Voss that same week. Real estate agent, handled my purchase years back. I asked her to run quiet comps, no yard sign, no public listing yet. She came back with $387,000 based on current market. I told her to draw up a listing agreement and hold it until I called. Legal notices printed. Lease signed. Listing agreement ready. Screenshots, bank records, a recorded call, and an attorney who'd cleared his Sunday. The math was already done. Kendra just didn't know it yet. By Saturday morning, I had everything laid out on my workbench. 3 legal notices, printed and hand-delivered. A signed lease on the garage apartment. A listing agreement for the house in a folder. A text thread. A recorded call. 31 circled bank transactions. And a photo log going back to the lock. What I hadn't settled yet was the house itself. I sat with it. The property was paid off, no mortgage, no lien, no one else's name on the deed. The equity in it right now was the cleanest financial position I'd ever held. $387,000 if I sold. I could walk away with that number, buy something smaller across town, and start clean. No history in the walls. No boxes in the basement with someone else's mother's name on them. The math was straightforward. The risk was in the execution. I knew how people like Kendra thought when a plan fell apart. I'd read it in 6 weeks of her own messages. She worked in contingencies. If I served the notices and she pushed back hard, she had angles. She could claim common law, standing no legal basis, but it would cost time to untangle. She could use the children as a sympathy play with neighbors, with mutual friends, with anyone willing to hear that I'd thrown kids out of a home. In the worst version, she makes a call somewhere and creates a mess that has nothing to do with facts and everything to do with delay and noise. None of those would succeed. But I didn't build this house on probably fine. I documented everything in advance precisely because of that risk. Every photo, every timestamp, Every circled transaction existed so that any version of events she tried to introduce had something clean and dated sitting directly across from it. I had 8 months of paper trail. She had a plan written in her own handwriting. I felt solid about where I stood legally. The harder question was whether to walk into that dining room on Sunday. The easier move was to skip it. Send the notices, let the process run, stay home. Belle had everything drafted. I could have handled it all without sitting across from 12 people who'd been clapping for a plan I'd never agreed to. But if I didn't show up, Kendra's version of Sunday would be the only version those 12 people ever heard. She'd frame my absence however she needed to the man who panicked, who was difficult, who couldn't handle a family. And every one of them would believe her because there'd be nothing else in the room. Bell was the one who said go. He told me a public ambush deserved a public answer on record, with a witness available by phone. He walked me through the risks. 12 family members, an emotionally charged holiday, 2 children in the room. He said to let her finish the full announcement before I responded to anything. Don't interrupt. Don't react. Let the room settle. Then answer. I told him I understood. Sunday morning, I ironed a shirt. I made a pan of cornbread from scratch because I was raised to not show up to someone's table empty-handed. And I wasn't going to give anyone in that room a reason to call me the rude one. I put Belle's number on speed dial. I set the folder of documents on the passenger seat next to the cornbread. 12 people were waiting for the last piece of their plan to show up and smile. I drove to Denise's house and rang the doorbell. Denise's dining room seated 10 comfortably. With 12 people, it was folding chairs against the wall and elbows touching. Ham on the counter, kids running in the hall when I got there. I set the cornbread down in the kitchen, found a seat near the end of the table, and kept my phone in my pocket with Belle's number already on the screen. The first hour was normal. People ate. Someone talked about a job change. Denise refilled glasses and smiled at me twice the warm, knowing smile of someone who believes a thing is already settled. Kendra was relaxed in a way I hadn't seen her before at a family dinner. Not nervous. Settled. The kind of settled that comes from having rehearsed something and feeling good about the material. Halfway through the main course, she stood up. She tapped her wine glass with a fork. The table went quiet. She looked around the room at her mother, at her siblings, at her kids, at everyone except me and said she had some exciting news. She talked about the yard. She talked about roots and stability and what family looks like when it shows up for each other. Her voice didn't waver once. She mentioned the bedrooms. She said she'd already mentally decorated her daughter's room, picked a color, thought about the furniture. She said Mason had been so generous through all of this. She said my name twice, both times in the third person, like I was a detail in a story that belonged to her. The table was nodding. Denise had her hands pressed together like she was sitting in a church pew. Kendra's brother was smiling. The 2 kids were looking at me from across the table, waiting for the moment to become official. 12 people in that room, and every single one of them had known about this longer than I had. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I reached into my pocket, took out my phone, and set it face up on the table in front of me. Slowly. Deliberately. Kendra's eyes dropped to it the second it hit the wood. The warmth in her expression shifted, not gone, but strained, like a smile held a half-second too long. She said, Mason, what are you doing? I said, before anyone starts making plans, I want everyone to hear something first. She said, put the phone away. We're in the middle of dinner. I said, in a minute. The room had gone quiet in a different way now. Not the comfortable quiet of a toast. The held breath kind when a room senses something is off and nobody moves first. I unlocked the phone, pulled up Belle's contact, and hit call. 2 rings. He picked up. I said, Mr. Bell, I have you on speaker. I'm at a family gathering and I need everyone here to have accurate information about the property. Bell's voice came through clearly. He introduced himself, attorney, retained by Mason regarding the residential property. He had the title in front of him. He read the address aloud. Then, without drama, he went through it. Mason held sole title to the property. No tenancy agreement had been signed, no cohabitation arrangement had been entered into. No member of Mason's girlfriend's family held any legal standing in the home. A lock change had been performed without the owner's authorization. Written notices had been hand-delivered that morning, formal notice that no tenancy would be entered into, and a demand for removal of all unauthorized property within 72 hours. Denise said, this is completely ridiculous. Bell said, ma'am, I'm simply reading from the public record. The room stayed silent. I thanked Bell and ended the call. Kendra was looking at the table. Denise was holding her wine glass without drinking from it. Her sister had leaned back in her chair. Nobody was nodding anymore. I opened the screenshot folder on my phone. I walked it down to Kendra's brother, the one whose smile at the announcement had looked the least rehearsed, the one who'd seemed genuinely caught off guard. I handed him the phone and said, "Read the thread." He read it. I watched his face go careful and still. He scrolled down. He found the part where Kendra wrote, "Once the kids are in, he can't legally just kick them out." He found the part where she called me practical and stable and noted that the house was paid off. He found 6 weeks of planning laid out in his sister's own words. He handed the phone back without saying anything. He looked at the center of the table and didn't look at Kendra for the rest of the night. I took the phone back and sat down. Kendra said, "You're really doing this right now? In front of everyone?" I said, "You announced it in front of everyone." "I'm just answering." She didn't fall for me. She ran a feasibility study, and every person in that room had just read the minutes. I left before dessert. There was no scene on the way out. No one followed me to the car. I pushed my chair in, walked through the kitchen, and grabbed my empty cornbread pan off the counter. The pan was clean, every piece gone. That was the one thing at that dinner that went exactly the way it was supposed to. The written notices had been hand-delivered that morning before I ever rang Denise's doorbell. Kendra called 3 times that night and once Monday morning. I let all 4 go to voicemail. The messages started hurt and ended angry, which is usually how those go when the plan doesn't land. By Tuesday, she'd arranged for someone to come collect the boxes. 8 boxes, out of my basement in 2 trips, gone before the end of the week. I replaced the lock myself, new deadbolt, 1 key, kept by me. The house listed officially the following Friday. No yard sign. It sold in 11 days. Final price, $381,000. I signed the closing paperwork at a title company 12 minutes from my shop and was back at my workbench by noon. Nurse Reyes moved into the garage apartment on schedule. First month's rent paid on time. We nodded at each other in the driveway. That was the right amount of everything. I rented a 2-bedroom near the shop. Smaller. No yard, no detached garage, no second bedroom quietly accumulating someone else's furniture. The first evening I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the only sound was the refrigerator. I didn't have to think about anything I didn't want to think about. People use the word boring like it's a warning. Like quiet means something failed. I built everything I had with 7 years of weekend work, and I nearly lost it to 31 small transactions and 1 Easter dinner I almost didn't attend. I brought cornbread and a lawyer on speed dial. I left with my deed, my silence, and my own set of keys. Wouldn't it be nice?